So do you ever talk to yourself? Willing to admit it? Do you do it in your head? Do you do it out loud? In your old age, is it more of a mumble? And when you do self-talk, what do you say? If you're like me, usually it's in an emotionally charged situation, like you've just been hit with the major criticism or really bad news, and you say, holy crap, what am I going to do now? Sorry, Mom. Or maybe you got a ton of stuff on your plate, and you're the kind of person that gives yourself self-pep talks, echoing some ancient coach or teacher saying, you got this. You got this. Here we go. Or maybe a major life crash has happened to you, and you know you have to respond, not react, so you channel that voice from your childhood, from mom or dad, grandpa or grandma, saying, just barely moving your lips and whispering to yourself, okay, you got this. You can do this. Or are you like me, sometimes talk to God and yourself at the same time? Like when you find out about the death of a loved one, and the words just flow out with any pre-thoughts, and you find yourself saying, no, 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 please, God, please, please. Or, God, help me now. Or looking into the face who's someone who's hurting, thinking, God, help them. God, be with them now. Jesus starts this little massively confusing parable with a man who's just been fired. His whole life has changed in an instant, and he's talking to himself, saying, okay, don't panic. You got this. No, you can't do heavy labor. You can't dig. You can't beg. You can do what you have to survive. Then he proceeds to cheat and lie his way out of the mess that he put himself in. There's an old story many of you may know about a young man in Montana. Bought a horse from a farmer for $100. The farmer agreed to deliver the horse the next day, but the next day arrived and the farmer reneged on his promise. He said, I'm afraid the horse has died. And the young man said, well, then give me my money back. And the farmer says, I can't do that. I already spent it. And the young man thought for a moment and he said, okay, just bring me the dead horse. The farmer asked, what do you want to do with a dead horse? And he said, I'm going to raffle it off. The farmer said, you can't raffle off a dead horse. He said, sure I can. Just watch me. I just won't tell anybody he's dead. A month later, the farmer met up with the young man and said, well, whatever happened to that dead horse? The young man said, I raffled it off. I sold 500 tickets for $2 a piece. I made a profit of $998. Farmer said, didn't anybody complain? Well, just the guy who won. So I gave him his $2 back. That's an enterprising young man. Might even call him something of a con man. There's something about a con man that captures our imagination. There's been several successful weekly television shows throughout the years. The hero is a former con man using his creative skills for the greater good. We like con man stories that have a happy ending. So Jesus told this parable about a man who was a nasty con man. Movie producer William Castle, known in the 50s for his low-quality horror films. In 1961, Castle did something nobody had ever done before. He let the audience choose the end of the movie. So the movie was shown up until the end, a crazed, reclusive killer, and then the ushers came in, turned on the lights, allowed the audience to vote on whether the killer should die or live. Then the ushers ran the end of the movie that the audience chose. The audience always chose death for the bad guy. It's a good thing human nature is predictable, because William Castle was counting on it, because see, he only filmed one ending to the movie, not two. He was so sure the audience would vote to kill the bad guy, he only filmed that one ending to save money. Jesus praises this con man. The question is, why? What was the one point Jesus was trying to get across? So here it is. When this con man was put in a corner, he used his brain to figure a way out. And then he put his plan into action. That's it. It's not a big deal. But Jesus says most of us Christians, people never figure it out. He put it this way: for the people of the world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. It's so easy to get hung up on the way the unscrupulous manager went about remedying his situation, we miss the point Jesus would have us see. You may have heard the story about Jay Wilkinson, son of the famous old football coach Bud Wilkinson. Jay ran for Congress in Oklahoma many years ago. People thought he would win easily because he was an All-American at Duke. He married a Miss America finalist after graduating from Harvard Divinity School. He was young, he was handsome, he was idealistic. He was a perfect subject for Madison Avenue wizardry. A television commercial was designed. You picture Jay and his wife walking hand in hand through an Oklahoma pasture. As they walked, they looked soulfully upward to the sky, to the accompaniment of soft music. And in the ad, it said, "A better tomorrow for all Oklahomans." The incumbent, man named Tom Steed, was just a good old boy with real sod-kicking credentials. He knew he was in for a tough fight. He scheduled a 40-second answer to Wilkinson's spot on TV. He just looked at the camera and said, I may not have a fancy degree from Harvard like young Wilkinson, but I do know enough not to look at the sky when I'm walking in a cow pasture. Steed won the election. Jesus surely gets weary with us Christians who walk through cow pastures looking at the sky. He surely gets tired of Christians who are continually looking to God to solve their problems for them when God has given them good minds to solve their own problems. And Jesus surely gets frustrated with us Christians who look at the world filled with misery and say, "Oh my," but don't lift a finger to improve the world. Jesus says, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. So how many of you are people of the light? How many of you are people of the world? I think all of us are kind of both. Nebraska didn't get to see this much yesterday. You and I are supposed to be those people of the light, and that's good. We know there's some problems in life we need to depend on God to solve because we can't do it by ourselves, but our world has real problems. We need to roll up our sleeves and seek after real-life solutions. We need to learn from those dirty, rotten scoundrels that Jesus talks about and get busy being shrewd, effective disciples that Jesus calls us to be. There once was a young businessman in Germany named Neckermann. He wanted to build his own small retail store into a large chain of department stores. His problem was that nobody knew his name, and he couldn't attract many customers. He only had limited capital. It was shortly after World War II. There were shortages everywhere in Germany on almost everything. The existing big department stores saw no reason to cut their prices, so they sold whatever they could get at healthy margins. And Neckermann saw this as an opportunity. If only he could position his store as a low-cost, high-value leader, he could build that enterprise of his dreams. As it happened, Neckermann managed to acquire a large shipment of spools of thread. That was in huge demand those days. Clothes were in short supply. Women were constantly repairing families' old garments. The obvious step for Neckermann would have been to sell these spools of thread in his own store. That would undoubtedly get him more business. But instead, he offered the whole shipment of the thread to the buyer from the largest department store chain in Germany at only a small profit. The buyer for the chain jumped on it, and in only a few weeks sold all the thread at a substantial profit. Usually takes several months to use up a whole spool of thread. So the whole transaction was forgotten by the time the executives at this large chain started to notice large crowds of people shopping at Neckerman's that had not shopped there before. It was the spools of thread the large chain has purchased. As German housewives finished off their spools of thread and it went empty, a piece of paper wrapped around the spool under the thread fluttered out. And on the piece of paper it said, if you had bought this thread at Neckerman's, it would have lasted twice as long. Overnight, everybody knew the name Neckerman. From then on, he had no trouble attracting customers. Shrewd, a little sneaky. Sometimes in business, the line between ethical and unethical, between shrewd and outright dishonest, is a little blurred. And nice guys or gals don't always finish first. There's one pastor, famous storyteller, talks about he just got back from a mission in Mexico sponsored by Mercy Hospital in San Diego and by the Rotary International. 13 doctors from that city and twice the number of nurses and support staff, a total of 55 persons, paid their own way to go down as a surgical team to minister to poor children in the southern part of Mexico. They went throughout the Rotary Club in that city for all those that did not have the means for medical attention to bring children with birth defects and crippling diseases to that clinic for surgery. It was amazing. They said they came by hundreds, mostly very, very poor, carrying their children, some teenagers as well, some who had spent their whole life with their hand over their face because they were ashamed of the way they looked. Some children had been hidden in a back room in the dark because their parents did not want their neighbors to see what they believed was a curse on their family. And after an hour or less in surgery, their appearance was changed, and those kids got a new life, a new hope. So if you're hard-headed, you might conclude the thousands of dollars that were spent that week in southern Mexico was just a drop in the bucket. It's not going to make any difference. I mean, an enormous suffering in this world, just wave after wave, that small thing is not going to make much difference. But the pastor said he talked to the Rotarians in southern Mexico who spent 2 years setting this up. It's a complex business establishing this kind of clinic in Mexico. And he asked them, why do you do this? They said, we believe we can change the world. And we're going to start right here. Sounds naive. It is naive when you compare it with the problems that exist, even in his own state. But he said, when you're confronted with a choice in this life, that's the point of these parables Jesus is telling. You are confronted with a choice, and you can either do nothing and play it safe, or you can take a risk. Those children's lives were changed forever, and their children's children. Some of you may know John Wesley as our Methodism's forefather. He wrote a famous sermon called The Use of Money to teach Methodists in 1700s in England a sense of Christian stewardship, and he used this passage for that sermon. I didn't think you could use this passage for anything. It was called The Dishonest Steward. He interpreted the parable, then he applied it to the question of the newly prosperous Methodists in England, the new middle class that hadn't been there before. How do you live a Christian life in a capitalist society? His advice had 3 parts. You may already know this. The first, he says, earn all you can. Take advantage of every opportunity. It's a direct application of the parable's message. Seize the day. If it's there for the taking, take it. Of course, he warned there are some businesses that Christians should not participate in. But with those exceptions, he said, number one, earn all you can. Number two, he said, save all you can. And he comes from the Puritan side of our Methodist family. And he lists the things you should not waste your money on, including those things that were pleasurable to the eye, pleasurable to the palate. I wish he hadn't said some of those things, but that's there. Beside that, the more importantly, from my point of view, he says you shouldn't invest on those things simply that are there to gratify a desire to gain the admiration of other people. He called it status symbols. We would call that status symbols today. Christians don't do that. Furthermore, Wesley made it clear there's not much that we spend our money on that does us much good. Most things we spend our money on, we can do without. And if you can do without, then you save a whole lot of money. So number one is earn all you can. Number two is save all you can. Number three is give all you can. And I notice most of us Methodists find obeying Wesley harder the further you go up on the list of income. Earn all you can, save all you can, no problem. Give all you can is a little harder. This is why he says it. It's based on this simple understanding of this New Testament passage that this stuff doesn't belong to us, not ultimately. We, people of the light, are stewards of what we have. We're here to serve God, and we should be as serious about it, as committed about it, as willing to take risks in doing it than those people who worship money, the people of this world. There's a minister in Columbus, Ohio, has a friend that works downtown. Friend is something of an enigma to the minister because he grows hot and cold about the church, about religion, but they're good friends. They have good relationship. They get together often and have lunch together. This time, the friend came to his office to meet him for lunch, and they sat down to talk before they went out. And the friend looked out the window and says, "You know, Barry, I got it figured out. The big guy up there is going to give us 2 questions when we get up to the gate of heaven." I'm serious now. I'm not kidding. I really mean this. The first question will be, what did you do with what I gave you? What did you do with what I gave you? Second question will be, and who did you do it for? We are people of the light. We can learn from the shrewdness and the risk-taking of the people of this world. Maybe we'll get that question when we get to heaven. What did you do with what I gave you? And who did you do it for? Amen.